these are the 5 things I'm hoping that you're going to walk away from tonight with, to understand better what self-care is, to know what your beliefs are about it, to figure out what the barriers are that might be preventing you from being able to implement it in your life, figure out how to remove those barriers, and then most importantly, figure out how you can practice a more authentic and more nourishing form of self-care in your life if you feel like what you're doing right now isn't quite working for you. Maybe it's not quite working, maybe it's not working at all. So yeah, I'm hoping tonight by the time you all leave, you will feel like you have something that is really going to work for you. So I like to just kind of launch right into what the dictionary says, because that typically informs what we know about the topics that we hear about. So for self-care, the dictionary says that it is the practice of protecting one's health and well-being, especially during times of stress. And so I italicized that word protecting because I think the dictionary always has a very Western approach to anything that's related to like mindfulness and meditation and self-care. It's like protecting yourself. It's like an adversarial thing. It's like defensive, right? So the stress is out there and it is attacking you and you have got to defend yourself and protect yourself, and that self-care is all about like this shield that you're going to hold up. I mean, like, this does not sound nourishing. This, quite frankly, it sounds exhausting. So anytime I see it set up to where there's kind of this black and white version where like the stress is bad and the self-care is good and they're opposites and you have to use one to protect yourself from the other, I am immediately suspicious. So this has always been the problem that I've had with self-care, is the same problem I've had with stress. When they say stress is bad for you, and it's like, I'm a human and I'm alive and I'm stressed simply because I am a human and I am alive. And now you're telling me that it's going to kill me if I don't stop it, and there's no way I can stop it. So now what? Like, great. That's just hopeless. So there's got to be another way to transcend this idea that self-care is all about protecting yourself from bad things. There's got to be another perspective. And so one of the things I think that kind of feeds this idea, these sort of visions of what self-care can be, if it's supposed to protect you and it's going to, you know, take care of you, this dream starts to emerge where it's like, in a perfect world, if you could have all the self-care you need, it would involve like retreats to beautiful exotic places by yourself or with your closest friends, time out in nature, really healthy food, ideally some form of massage or spa services. You know, this is like the dream self-care right here. And so these are acceptable alternatives if you cannot afford the dream vacation or the massage. You know, we think of like meditation. And then there's also working in the garden is another way to get out and get in touch with nature. And in your dreams that involves, you know, beautiful raised beds with no weeds at all and perfect rows of flourishing, you know, plants. And you're also wearing very cute red rubber boots to go with, which I'm like, I'm not picking fun here because I really see those rubber boots and I'm like, I need rubber boots when I'm gardening because she just looks so cute. And her basket, do you see that basket with all of the beautiful tools laid out that are perfectly shiny and clean, unlike mine, which are like ancient and rusted? So, you know, these visions of self-care and how beautiful it's going to be and how wonderful you're going to feel when you're finally able to implement this in your life, and this is the reality that you deal with, is like, we don't get to take that vacation and we don't get the time to meditate because we're dealing with either that could represent your crying child or your crying boss or your crying parent or your crying, you know, friend. Like, there's always somebody who needs something from us. And then there's always piles of laundry and tons of dishes and leaves need to be raked and then the snow needs to be shoveled. Like, there's always things that need to be done that take you away from that beautiful time out in the garden. And, you know, no massage, no 8 hours of sleep necessarily. A lot of us are walking around pretty darn exhausted. Whether you're dealing with like caregiving or you've got insomnia or you're just so busy that you can't find time to get all the things done in a day, self-care can fall by the wayside really easily. And those visions that we have of, you know, what it could look like seem so far away from what we actually are able to do for ourselves. So I want to really quick go into some of the barriers that we experience The three that I've been able to identify, and I would love to know if you all identify more tonight when you're talking, but these are the three that I have found that typically people tend to say is a reason why they're not able to do the self-care that they would like. First of all, there's not enough time. And this one makes sense. We have 24 hours in a day. We have 7 days in a week, 365 days in a year. And so we have these boundaries. And there's only so much time, plus we need ideally 8 hours of sleep a night, so we're told, which can be a pipe dream for some people. And some people need less, and some people need more. But all of these things factor into this idea that time is finite and we don't have enough of it. And so a second reason that can sometimes get in the way is not enough money. So if for you self-care is something that would involve going to see someone like a therapist or a coach or a massage person or a chiropractor, or all those different modalities cost money. And so that can be a limiting factor as to how much self-care you're able to provide for yourself. And so the third reason that I have heard, which is that self-care a lot of the time seems to be something that needs to be done in solitude. The idea of doing meditation or mindfulness or just relaxing in general. Like some self-care would involve other people, but a lot of times it's seen as something where you want to be quiet and by yourself. And you may have time, but that doesn't necessarily mean you have time alone. And so this is especially the case for people who are caregivers, because if you're caring for an elderly parent who has a lot of needs, you really only get solitude when you find somebody to come in and watch them or to be there with them. And the same thing with little kids. And so just because you may have a lot of free time doesn't necessarily mean that you have time completely alone and not having to worry about somebody else in your life. These three that I talked about are more concrete. They sort of are dealing in the world of circumstances. And some of what you all are talking about is getting into that idea that there's more than just the concrete. There's actually some other things going on that maybe, play a part in our own mind and in our perspectives that can play a part. And so that's a good segue to talk about what's really holding us back when it comes to being able to provide that self-care. And I think one of the biggest things that when I really had to start wrapping my head around how am I going to get into this and to figure out how to help people move through this transition to where I know I want to take you is what is self-care? Does anybody even really, we had the definition earlier. And that sounds really good, except it doesn't. But then this whole idea of the word care is just confusing. Are we talking about the noun, which is providing for your health and your welfare and your maintenance? That's what one version of care is, right? And so if this is self-care, then brushing your teeth is self-care. You're providing for your care, right? Or are we talking about care as the verb, which is to care for someone, to care for yourself, to nurture yourself, treasure yourself, make yourself feel adored, which is that whole idea of going to the spa, or having all those things that make you feel like you are being cherished. Which one is it? Is it both? It could be both. And so, but when we think about it, okay, so I was like, if it's this, there's a lot of things we do that fall under the category of self-care that sound really boring and actually sound more like chores and things. Going to the doctor is a form of self-care, and who puts that on your self-care dream list? Nobody. That's on your list of annoying things that you have to get done and that take time away from your actual self-care that you want to be doing. Okay, but wait. So when I started thinking about it, I was like, everything, there's a lot of things that qualify as self-care that we don't want to admit are actually self-care. What is it that is keeping us from feeling like we are not getting enough self-care in our life when we are very clearly caring for ourselves, both caring for ourselves and caring about ourselves? What is it about this idea that it has to look a certain way, or there are certain particular things we need that are going to fit the bill and other things that just aren't? So that's one thing that brought up for me, was like, okay, so what exactly is self-care, and why are certain types of self-care considered to be more valuable or more beneficial? That was something that came to my mind. Something else that can get in the way is feelings of guilt or feelings of defensiveness. So if you have ever thought that putting yourself first means putting other people second, and then that makes you feel guilty, that can be a barrier in and of itself to being able to really care for yourself fully, because that guilt is kind of hanging out in the corners of your mind. And then there's also with this idea of defensiveness that, you know, if you've ever had the thought, I deserve to put myself first every now and then, and why can't everybody just get on the frickin' same page as me? Because this is not working. This is not fair. That defensive feeling of like, everybody just needs to get on board with this, that I'm going to do this, and they need to stop making me feel guilty. So that guilt and that defensiveness is something that, you know, can kind of keep us distracted and keep our inner critic engaged, which is kind of preventing us from really fully being present and caring for ourselves. And so it just kind of is what it is, especially if you have this natural tendency to put other people first. So this was the definition that we saw at the beginning, this idea of self-care as being a practice that you have to use to protect yourself. And when I really had to get down to like, what is self-care for me, and what do I think self-care is at its core, which is the thing that we're not talking about, it's this. It's that self-care is a means to reconnect with your sense of self-worth. That's it. It is about providing for your maintenance and your health and your well-being. It is about making yourself feel cherished and making yourself feel, you know, adored. But really, that's just the surface of what it looks like. What it is at the core is this idea of reconnecting with your self-worth. So this looks like, basically, when you practice self-care from this perspective, that it's not just about taking care of all the things, doing all the maintenance, doing all the, you know, all the things that you think it should be. It's about recognizing that when you are doing those things and doing them in a way that helps you reconnect with your sense of self-worth, that they help you, self-care helps you get to that center. Self-care helps you live from this central place, this core of where everything around you can be crazy, and you may not have enough time, and you may not have enough money, and you may not have enough solitude, but you are able to reconnect with your self-worth by whatever practices you are able to do, so that you can live from that center. And so when self-care is a vehicle, a means to get back to that center, and that center represents your self-worth, your sense of worthiness, that's what, for me, that's what I want to explore, this idea that that's what self-care is really attempting to reach, that it's a vehicle for getting to that core and getting to your self-worth. Because the reality is that nobody is deserving of self-care. Nobody is deserving of self-care. We are all worthy of it. Okay? And there is a difference. There is a huge difference between feeling like you are deserving of care and feeling that you are worthy of it. This idea of being worthy, you know, I define worthiness as this, that we are all respectable and valuable regardless of our circumstances and regardless of what we make or do or give to the rest of the world. We are worthy. We are worthy because we're alive. We're worthy because we're humans. We're worthy because we're beings. Like animals are worthy. Everybody is worthy simply because we are alive. We don't have to do anything to earn that worthiness. And that, you know, this gets to the root of so many things. If you can, you know, self-worth is one of the biggest things that I think we as a society struggle with. I think it's the root of everything. I think it's at the root of war. It's at the root of all conflict. It's at the root of, you know, a lot of the mental health things that we struggle with. So if we can find a way to facilitate it, to get people to reconnect with it. And if this idea of being able to provide self-care that is unconditional is just one of the ways that you can start to reinforce this idea of your worth, that you can validate your worth and how you are worthy of unconditional love. I mean, that takes self-care from this thing that would be nice to have to this really big effing deal, okay? Not to, I mean, that's a big deal. That's like life-changing, but that's also world-changing. There is enough time to do self-care because virtually everything you do during your day is self-care if you take that perspective of it. Washing your hands is self-care. Brushing your teeth, taking a shower, eating your breakfast, doing virtually everything. And so it is a matter of perspective. I think, you know, what Christina and Mary were talking about in the beginning. It's recognizing that, making yourself a priority in your life, and most importantly, knowing that you are worthy of that. And that, bringing that into your consciousness when you do it. And so that when you wash your hands, like there is one phrase tonight that if you walk out the door with this one phrase, you will be able to take this and implement it. I am worthy of this. All right? When you are brushing your teeth, I am worthy of this. When you are washing your hands, I am worthy of this. There is enough money when it comes to self-care, because the reality is that if self-care is about reconnecting with your self-worth, and there are so many different ways that you can do that, that connecting with your self-worth is priceless. You cannot put a price on it. And so there is enough money because there are so many things you can do that don't cost a lot of money. There are a lot of things you can do that don't cost any money. And that when you are doing them with this idea that I am worthy of this, you are doing something that is invaluable for you in your life. We sometimes think we need something because that's what we've been told, or because that's what our vision of what it should look like is. That in order to have self-care, I need solitude. And I am saying that you can trust yourself to know that if that is what you need, if solitude is a factor in your self-care, that when you feel worthy of it, you will find a way to make it a priority to get even 5 minutes of it. And when that 5 minutes, when you do that from that place of I am worthy of this, will feel so much longer and so much more nourishing and so much more beneficial than that perspective of I only have 5 minutes and 5 minutes is not enough. Solitude is a means to an end, and that end is to figure out how to stay centered in the middle of the chaos. Solitude is just one way that we can find our center. There are so many other ways that you can find your center. Solitude sounds like the dream. The dream vision of that is much more appealing than some of these other ways that you're talking about. But there are many avenues to finding your center. And the goal is not to just go live in solitude for the rest of your life unless you feel called to go live in a monastery, in which more power to you. Or you might feel called to go on a 10-day, silent retreat. Or, you just might feel called to take a weekend away every now and then. And that's okay. But to recognize that it's not that provides you with that nourishment. It's that provides you with that reconnection with yourself so that you can take that and go back into the world. And if you can find other ways of doing that reconnecting, by feeling worthy of the other types of self-care that you're giving yourself, then maybe solitude isn't actually as important. But I can guarantee you that when you feel worthy of it, if it is important to you, you will find a way. You will do what you need to do. And it may not be what your inner critic would call enough, but you'll get what you need. There are beliefs that you may hold that you've had for a very long time in your life that are preventing you from fully feeling worthy, from feeling that sense of worthiness. These are the barriers to worthiness that prevent the self-care from sticking. You can do all the self-care you want, but if you hold beliefs that are running counter to the fact that you feel worthy, like if you hold beliefs that tell you that you are not worthy, all the self-care in the world will not sink in. So what self-care in this way becomes is a vehicle to help you identify what are those beliefs so that you can start to become conscious of them. Because you've been carrying them around with you all your life anyway, but you just haven't even realized it necessarily. When you start to become conscious of what those beliefs are, that's when you have an opportunity to really start to dig in and figure out what's going on there. And bring those into your consciousness, start to explore them, start to disprove them, sometimes a belief comes into your consciousness and you're like, well, that's stupid. I can't even believe I believe that. The limiting beliefs that are keeping us from living fully and implementing self-care and feeling fully worthy, most of them fall apart like a house of cards when you finally realize what they are. So when you implement your self-care from this approach that you are worthy and your inner critic gets ticked off about it and starts throwing up all these excuses, that's your opportunity to finally figure out what you've been believing that's been holding you back. That's how self-worth can be a vehicle to finally, self-care can be a vehicle to connecting with your self-worth. Like this could become your life's practice, like your journey to your sense of worthiness. This may be all you need. Maybe there's other things that you want to add to it. I think we trivialize self-care as a society when we keep it as like this dream of what it should look like. Or we keep it trapped in this idea that it's about meeting our health and our wellness needs only, or making ourselves feel cherished. I think we need to let it out of the box and let it really be what it actually, implement it fully.